There's a growing movement that has strategically expanded onto and become a part of many colleges and universities throughout the nation, which has helped to change the culture of those school campuses, but not for the better. What is it? Well, it's called College Sex Week, and few parents are aware of it, and few students are prepared for it in terms of the influence it has on the atmosphere and activities on those campuses, and not for the better.
The statistics, nothing short of alarming. Reports of sexual assaults on campus, too numerous to ignore, and yet so many cases remain unreported and unresolved in the often toxic mix of heavy drinking and hookup culture.
Our closer look now at a crisis on campus. 60 universities have been put on notice by the Department of Education for how they've handled sexual assaults. Time magazine reports this week that nearly 1 in 5 college women have been victims, and the author of that cover story is here, along with a university president taking action. After this from Fusion's Alicia Menendez.
At Columbia University this week, an issue coming out of the shadows into the national spotlight.
The nationwide outcry about sexual assault on college campuses.
And some of the country's most prestigious colleges are among dozens under scrutiny this morning. On Thursday, the Department of Education named 55 schools under federal investigation for their handling of sexual assault claims. They include Harvard, Princeton, UC Berkeley, Ohio State, and Florida State.
As if college students somehow aren't saturated with sex already, from complete access to the internet on their cell phones to the likes of 50 Shades of Grey, to Pornhub, which is better referred to as Predator Hub, to now the normalization of Kink, which once upon a time was used as torture methods during the Middle Ages.
Harvard is going to give official status to the Munch for the BDSM Club. I don't really understand that name. Maybe somebody who goes to Harvard can explain it for me. But it is a BDSM kinky club where they're going to be doing bondage and stuff like that. Or not necessarily doing it in the organization, but talking about it, supporting each other, giving ideas, I guess. We've got some information here. It's expected to get the go-ahead by the Committee on Student Life. And after this, they'll be able to meet for lunch and dinner on campus, promote gatherings on school grounds, and apply for grants from the school's Drug and Alcohol Peer Advisors organization. We've got a little bit of information. One member talked to The Observer and said that during one of their private get-togethers, she was hit with a riding crop, a belt, and canes, and says, "Floggers are my favorite."
And add to that spring break, and like colleges need any more exposure to sex, more education or enlightenment on sex, and have introduced to them more sexual deviance by means of live demonstrations on campus. But certain groups are bound and determined to push the limits and ensure that campuses become even more sexualized.
The goal of Sex Week is basically put on a lot of events throughout the week and help encourage students to practice safe sex, and also when they're exploring different kinds of sex like anal sex or BDSM, to do it safely with like guidance from some of the experts we bring in.
He invited me into a larger play space where kink equipment of all flavors was laid out on tables. Whips, chains, paddles, restraints, and clamps, a Wartenberg wheel, and a violet wand. I selected my preferences, then stood compliantly as the count buckled me and attached my wrist to a St. Andrew's cross.
All right, these are called floggers right here. And what they do is provide a wide range of sensations from a nice thuddy to a nice stingy.
My job as a guest and model bottom was to let him do this. Submit and obey. This is me being bound in braided rope to a suspension winch. While restrained, Count Boogie explored my erotic interest in the violet wand, a low current, high voltage electrical stimulation.
So what it does is it creates an electrical charge and ignites the gas that's in this ball. And when I put it against your skin, the electricity goes straight into you. But when I pull it a little bit away, the electricity is trying to find a ground to go to, and it makes a zap like that.
On my skin, it was painless, but pulled slightly away from my breast, that's when I got shocked.
Little tickly?
It's not my favorite sensation. A lot of BDSM dungeon culture is about sensations, physical and psychological. Count Boogie just placed my hands on this web unrestrained, and yet there's still a sensation of being trapped. I know Boogie isn't going to touch me with the whip, but its crack still causes me to flinch. And similarly, the sharp blade of this large knife across my chest can evoke all sorts of thoughts and feelings. I had to trust that without my mouth, the use of my hands, or the ability to run away, Count Boogie cared about my well-being and was never going to hurt me without without consent. I also trusted that he was trained in all of these techniques, that he knew how to rub oil onto my skin before wax play and what temperature the wax needed to be. He knew the delicacy of cupping, how to create a suction without rupturing blood vessels, and how to light me on fire. Being bound, disciplined, dominated, and beaten at the Threshold dungeon was an enlightening 3-hour process. I got to revisit familiar experiences and open myself to new ones. As the Threshold website states, we are all new at one point, and many of us were nervous about what to expect, so our goal is to empower you with an understanding of Threshold, Kink, and BDSM.
This year we're going to have a bunch of porn stars here, and they'll be able to talk about their experiences behind the scenes.
They're spending a lot of money to go to that school, a lot of money, and they're not there to learn about these issues. It's Sex Week at every college and university. They don't need help. It's Sex Week in America everywhere, in every crevice of the nation. People are on Tinder. They're having polygamous relationships. We are an over-sexualized culture, and we don't need to pay money to go to a school to have them give us free vasectomies and condoms.
Yet, little do the administrations of these schools, which have foolishly elected to host such activities, little do they understand, and little are the parents aware that such activities end up being the perfect magnet to attract sexual predators. Oh, there are some that are inclined to balk at such words, but when you ask them about their forensic clinical experience working with the full range of incarcerated sexual predators, they suddenly try to change the subject. But for those who've worked intensively with sexual predators, conducting sex offender treatment for years, the dangers of such activity attracting sexual predators are clear and very real.
I was raped by one of my close friends who is also a student at Columbia.
Emma Solkowitz is one of 23 students at Columbia University, many of whom say they've been victims of sexual assault on campus, filing a federal complaint that says the university has not taken the violence seriously.
Fallout this evening from that campus trial. 2 former college football players now facing decades in prison found guilty of sexually assaulting a female student in a dorm room at Vanderbilt University. And this evening, a new case, a star swimmer now charged at another school. ABC's Ryan Smith on the new focus on the culture of college campuses.
Topic, a painful national discussion. 95 campuses are under federal investigation for their handling of sexual assault complaints on campus. And just this week, a Stanford student charged for allegedly raping a woman on campus grounds. 2 students on bikes stopped the attack and police were called. The accused, star swimmer Brock Turner, has withdrawn from the university. Stanford banning the student from setting foot on campus again. Turner's attorney saying they had no comment tonight. Turner faces multiple felony counts and will be arraigned on Monday. As for the Vanderbilt case, Vandenberg and Beatty will be sentenced on March 6th and could face decades in prison.
That's the little understood reality of Sex Week. It serves to create a culture that attracts sexual predators, because sexual predators are free to hunt. Because students and administration have been so dumbed down and brainwashed and already groomed into believing that deviance, it's harmless. Thus, what you will inevitably find at schools that allow Sex Week to take hold on their campuses is an increase in sexualized behavior, which will always progress into sexual assaults. Though we could focus on any school that hosts Sex Week. Take Northwestern University, for example. Northwestern has boasted of their Sex Week activities for years, and the activities and promotion of these activities have grown in scope and in deviance. Well, what do we find? Is there evidence that sexual deviance and sexual assaults have risen on the campus of Northwestern? Well, the evidence is not only clear, but alarming.
Top story, a campus protest following reports of sexual assaults at Northwestern University. Several women reported they were slipped a date rape drug and assaulted at a fraternity event.
An investigation into sexual assault and the use of date rape drugs continues at Northwestern University's Evanston campus.
Explosive allegations against a prominent Northwestern University professor. In a group letter, 10 women, all former students and faculty, accuse a prominent professor of harassment and verbal abuse. CBS 2's Audrina Bigas picks up the story live in Evanston. Audrina.
Erica, nearly a dozen women wrote and signed this open letter calling this Medill's Me Too moment. The letter accuses Klein of performing unwanted neck massages on women who were trying to work and trying to kiss a prospective employee. The letter claims he talked about his sex life and pressed for explicit details about others.
Some unusual extracurricular activity at Northwestern University causing outrage. With the story, we have Kevin Helliker in the Chicago Bureau. Kevin, tell us what's been going on.
Well, Simon, ever since word leaked out that at a Northwestern University professor held a demonstration after class that included sex between a man, a woman, and a sex toy, outrage has been growing up in Evanston, where the campus is. It's been growing across the country among Northwestern alums. And then coming to the defense of the professor are his colleagues in the world of the study of human sexuality.
Okay, and the university flip-flopped a bit. Initially, they supported him, saying the university supports the efforts of faculty to further the advancement of knowledge, and they said some more, and then they flip-flopped, and then they're not so happy now. What happened to make that change?
I think what happened, very likely, what I know happened, is that the university heard from a large number of unhappy supporters and alums. And and where exactly the president of the university was during the first few days that this scandal or story broke isn't clear. But he came out yesterday with a statement saying he's very unhappy about it, and he has launched an investigation. And in his words, he sees it as an opportunity to clarify what constitutes appropriate pedagogy.
Lisa Chavarria is live near the Northwestern University campus this morning. And Lisa, can you tell us anything about what this student may have said about her alleged attacker?
At this point, Northwestern police have not commented on some of the specifics, especially a description. We're still working on gathering that for you this morning. But the campus has been alerted to this. There's a campus alert that was issued last night after a Northwestern student was sexually assaulted in her dorm room. Northwestern police say that she is acquainted with this person and she met him at an L station near the campus here in Evanston. They went back to her dorm room, and that's where police say he sexually assaulted her.
Well, Evanston police are now working with Northwestern police to keep students safe after a series of recent attacks.
CBS 2's Mike Puccinelli joins us now live from the Hyman Avenue and Sheridan Road, near where those attacks happened. Hi, Mike.
Hi, and we expect to see police from Evanston out here both on foot and in their squad cars because, well, the latest attack happened right here on Hyman Avenue, which you see behind me right now. As we push in with the camera, I want to give you a sense of just how close the other ones are to this very spot. You can see a traffic light in the background. That's Chicago and Sheridan. That's where the first attack happened. And then just about 100 yards west of that light, that is where the second attack happened. So we're talking about a very, very close area. They all began a couple of days before Halloween and continued for nearly 2 weeks.
Tonight, Northwestern University police say Taylor has also been contacting female students through Tinder, but they declined to meet him. Police believe Taylor may have tried the same thing at colleges in other states. Taylor is charged with 1 count of criminal sexual assault.
Now, a former Northwestern University professor is due in court today, charged in the high-profile murder. NBC5's Sandra Torres is live from the Layton Criminal Courthouse with more. Sandra.
Good morning, Alex. You may remember this case, that former Northwestern professor accused of meeting a British man online, and prosecutors say that he basically carried out a, quote, sexual fantasy by killing a 26-year-old Chicago man. And that victim was Trenton Cornell Duran Lowe. He was found dead in a River North high-rise in 2017. And police say he was stabbed about 70 times. Prosecutors accuse his boyfriend of the murder, former Northwestern professor Wyndham Latham, along with Andrew Warren, a British man. Both men were on the run for nearly 2 weeks, going on a bizarre road trip and making donations on behalf of the victim along the way before they turned themselves in California.
Though we previously looked at the dangers of College Sex Week, we felt it necessary to once again alert prospective students and their parents to the dangers of schools that host Sex Week activities, since things have only gotten worse on those campuses in terms of student safety and the moral freefall. In that first podcast, Dr. Julie Slattery voiced her concerns at the outset of that interview which opened with the following warning. Little do these college administrators know that sophisticated sexual predators will actually select these schools as their prime hunting grounds, as the school culture has created the right conditions for targeting vulnerable and unsuspecting young students. Like sharks gliding silently toward unsuspecting swimmers enjoying a day at the beach, these predators know how to select their victims. And in an unguarded moment of time, the world can change for these victims forever. Given the lasting impact such experiences can have on young people, Dr. Julie Slattery shares some of her concerns.
But I've heard too many stories of kids that get sucked into this, and sometimes they never come back, and sometimes it's just, basically a train wreck for a few years before they can get their lives back on track.
Well, sadly, the issue of Sex Week continues to grow, so we must once again address it. And no one understands the nuances of this movement any better than Patrick Trueman, the president and CEO of the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, the nation's premier organization addressing sexual exploitation and all forms of human trafficking.
Students are essentially told that this is normal activity. So they're normalizing what is, of course, shouldn't be normal activity on the college campuses. It's a breakdown of morals, it's a breakdown of inhibitions that is sought by those promoting Sex Week. And they're very successful at it. And I think this is one reason we have a college rape crisis in our country.
We'll hear from Patrick Truman next on Survivor Support's Predator Watch podcast.
Predator Watch provides a brief overview of important stories in the news or issues of concern as they relate to understanding the nature of sexual predators, their characteristics, how their minds operate, their methods of manipulation, and what motivates them. They hide in plain sight, can smell an opportunity a mile away, and count on people not understanding just how dark their hearts are and how intent they are about always producing victims. Stay tuned as Jon Uhler, a licensed professional counselor with over 25 years of professional experience treating both survivors and sexual predators, shares his insights on this edition of Predator Watch.
Hi, and I'm Jon Uhler, and you're listening to the Predator Watch podcast. Well, thank you for joining us. I'm Jon Uhler, and I'm excited to have on the phone with me to discuss the issue of the problems and dangers of colleges hosting Sex Week is Mr. Patrick Truman. Patrick serves as president and CEO at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, where he and his dedicated staff direct their efforts toward educating people, organizations, companies, and government leaders and policymakers on the relationship and connections between pornography, obscenity, and sexual exploitation of women and children. Under his leadership, the National Center on Sexual Exploitation has been instrumental in getting major private companies and government agencies to improve policies and enact important reforms pertaining to obscene material. In 2015, Mr. Truman, a lawyer for more than 40 years, established the organization's Law Center to influence the law and our courts to ensure the values of human dignity are represented. Patrick Truman is a former chief of the Child Exploitation and Obscenity Section, Criminal Division at the U.S. Department of Justice from 1988 to 1993. While there, he supervised an office of prosecutors and worked with the nation's 93 U.S. attorneys to initiate and coordinate federal prosecutions of child sex crimes, child pornography, and obscenity. Patrick, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. And you started addressing this issue, the issue of pornography and exploitation, in the mid-'80s. Is that right?
In 86 was the time I started on this issue.
And it was that with Dr. Dobson and the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography with EDMES?
No, that commission, which President Reagan formed, had studied the issue of pornography and issued a 2-volume report of the harms of pornography, but also made a series of recommendations, one of which was to establish a strike force of prosecutors at the Justice Department to take down the major producers and distributors of hardcore pornography. So I ended up heading that office of prosecutor.
Well, we so appreciate you coming on and giving us a few minutes of your time to address the issue of Sex Week on college campuses. Certainly, the National Center on Sexual Exploitation has done tremendous work in all sorts of areas, everything from trying to affect national policy to having laws changed, and you all are doing really the foremost work, in my estimation. I don't think that's an understatement. Can you speak to the work of the National Center for a moment, Pat?
Sure. The National Center on Sexual Exploitation is 56 years old, and we address the full spectrum of sexual exploitation because we want to address the fact that these issues are connected. Pornography consumption doesn't end there. When a man, for example, consumes a great amount of pornography, he will act out. If he's married, he'll act out with other women. He'll act out at strip clubs. He'll act out at porn shops. He might take advantage of a child to molest. Sex trafficking works into this. Prostitution and sex trafficking are linked. So a man who thinks he's visiting a prostituted woman may well be visiting a sex trafficked woman. And we see this with children that get pornography at whatever age. They're acting out on other children. Now we have a crisis in our country of child-on-child sex abuse. We were just informed of a 15-year-old boy who tried to rape one girl just off the school grounds one day and beat her up badly. But the next day he succeeded in raping a second girl. 15 years old, he's been steeped in pornography for several years. And this is what we're seeing. So we try to address the full spectrum of sexual exploitation.
And that's a perfect segue then into the topic of Sex Week. Because it has become such an influence, and a lot of people can say that not many schools, but every year more schools are having Sex Week activities. They just don't arise. There's been methodical grooming, as it were, as far as what schools will be targeted. Before campuses know it, they've done an effective job in getting a foothold, and now, under the guise of education and compassion, thus start these activities. But little do people know that there really is an agenda behind this movement, and the marketing is slick. They will say it's everything from compassion to education, but in reality, it's very much a grooming mechanism by which predators then can begin to have a much easier time. So I'm now calling this, as far as Sex Week, it's really target marketing, and it's and schools do not understand that it becomes a calling card for predators. And just a week or so ago, there was an investigation, I believe, in the University of Arizona, that, surprise, surprise, they're discovering that there's trafficking going on, and that's, it follows. So, Pat, what message do you have to both parents and students to help them connect some of these dots that if they attend a school that has this sort of activity, that has Sex Week activities, what are the concerns, and behind the scenes, as you know, and then me having worked with sex offenders, incarcerated sex offenders for 11 years, there are people within this realm, pornographers and those that are sex offenders, that specifically utilize these methods to get a foothold and then begin the process of grooming and seducing, and before you know it, they have now captured the hearts and minds of additional young people.
Well, the ostensive purpose of Sex Week, we are told by the students and the outside groups, the porn industry, which participates, and others, is to destigmatize the conversation around sex. They want to encourage, they say, safe sex. But when you see what goes on, they show pornographic movies. Oftentimes, pornographic movies are detailing sexual violence against women, anal sex, BDSM, sadomasochistic sex, etc. And what ends up happening is the students they come in, you have the aura of the institution sanctioning this because it's a campus-funded event, and the students are essentially told that this is normal activity. So they're normalizing what is, of course, shouldn't be normal activity on the college campuses. It's a breakdown of morals, it's a breakdown of inhibitions that is sought by those promoting Sex Week. And they're very successful at it. And I think this is one reason we have a college rape crisis in our country. We have statistics demonstrating how significant the number of college female students experienced rape. It's something approaching 1 in 4 has received some sort of non-consensual sexual conduct on campus, whether it's rape or some other very offensive touching. And so because we have this crisis on campus, you have to ask, how does Sex Week fit in? Is it really there to encourage safe sex? It doesn't sound like it, because anal sex is always taught, and there's nothing that distributes the AIDS virus faster than anal sex. They always discuss sadomasochistic sex, which is sexual violence. Is that encouraging safe sex? And the notion that they're going to destigmatize the conversation around sex, well, they do that. They successfully do that. They get kids talking about sex, experimenting with sex, experiencing with multiple partners, group sex, etc. So if that's the goal that a university wants to seek rather than teach, then they're successful at it. But I don't think that's why parents send their kids to public institutions.
No, I would concur. And as you were talking, certainly a number of things are running through my mind. Not the least of which, and what brought this to our attention, and it certainly came past our attention over the past couple of years, but there was a story about Northwestern University, their upcoming Sex Week. That was now the week after Easter, ironically. So kids coming back from spring break, if that wasn't enough. But we reached out to Northwestern University. We put 4 separate phone calls into the administration. One was an extensive voicemail and never even received a phone call back, because we offered to have them on in a user-friendly setting to do a podcast. It was not going to be antagonistic, but we certainly were not going to hold back our perspective or our concerns, but to give them an opportunity to share from their perspective how this makes sense, how this enhances the prospect of overall student adjustment. And given also that Northwestern has a Methodist background, their roots are Methodist, and you look at those schools where it started at Yale, one could make the case that those that have been behind this movement have been starting with the best schools. And so, given the fact that Northwestern, and we told them we were going to proceed with this topic and to talk about the article that was about them, we wanted to, in a polite way, extend that invitation, and there's no other way around it. They blew us off.
What is the purpose behind Sex Week? Why do they have it? Well, if you look at some of the sponsors of Sex Week, the porn industry has sponsored this many times. Well, of course, it's in their interest to promote pornography, and we do have the professors, some of them that are actively engaged. There was one incident where on the week of Sex Week, I think it was an invited instructor came in and disrobed in the classroom and taught a course on sex. And then if you look at the agenda of what they are teaching, I don't think we can say it on the air here, but it is material that is not normalized sex. Now, of course, in Sex Week, they'd say, well, what's normal sex? But let's just say that it's not meant to promote family and relationships in a marriage. So you have the purpose of Sex Week being to promote the culture of anything goes. And parents who spend a lot of money to send their kids to college, save for a lifetime to send them there, I think looking at that agenda would say that this is not for my child, when what child would be. Now, one encouraging thing, though, that I found, John, is that you have some of the feminist groups beginning to speak out because they don't like the sexual violence that's taught. And you have some of the pro-family groups on campus beginning to speak out. Why are we hosting Sex Week when we have a sexual assault crisis on campus? And so the times are changing. And in this Me Too culture today, where women are speaking up about the sexual violence that's been perpetrated on them, I think Sex Week is endangered. And we're going to do all we can here at the National Center to make sure that's true.
Looking at those that are within the industry, within the porn industry, because hand in glove with any group that would want to establish on a college campus. I mean, a college campus is already loose enough, but we don't need any help of this onslaught of this triple X mindset that's coming in. We had Julie Slattery, who was kind enough to do a podcast with us, and of course she spoke to the issue of 50 Shades of Grey in her book, Pulling Back the Shades. So it has become now so dark, and to think that you have these types of quote-unquote instructors being brought in to describe bondage. But I think it'll be instructive in closing to help people understand that, okay, maybe one or two participants, as far as people that are instructing, okay, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they just want to help increase awareness of safe sex. But the vast majority of those that are behind this, that are teaching this stuff, there's such a connection to a desire and benefit from opening the door into not just experimentation, but ultimately saturating these kids, especially the men, but it's happening to the women now too with erotica, saturating their minds in porn. And so the question is, if somebody goes down that path, and the argument is, well, not everybody gets addicted. We've all heard that. Yep, not only everybody gets addicted, but what if it's the Ted Bundys out here in California, the Golden State rapist? They finally found the guy. And the question is this: let's say we have 1,000 people, and only a small percentage may have a propensity or proclivity toward being addicted. But how many people does it take to terrorize and to hold an entire state hostage? It took one man. And what I found in working with the perpetrators and the pedophiles, but the serial rapists and murderers behind bars, and I worked with them in a clinical capacity, up close and personal. I'm certified in the hair psychopathy checklist. And so the thing that people don't understand, and so Pat, I'll speak to that for a moment and then let you have the last word on this. What people don't understand is that porn just doesn't modify behavior, and it doesn't just set mindsets, but it's not neutral. And what I found, and it became irrefutable, and you know it's irrefutable when the worst of all these sex offenders just stare at you like, wow, Uhler, you kind of caught on to this, is that it opens the door to a very dark world. It gives them permission, and here it is. It's not just helping them internalize beliefs, which it does in certain segments, like, oh, maybe I should try this with a woman. But that's 1%. The dirty little secret that the perpetrators don't want us to know is this, that porn simply gives them the opportunity to override their conscience and to begin to throw off inhibitions and begin to objectify and fantasize and start viewing women not just as an object to be used, but something to create pain inside that, to inflict them with pain. And it fuels them, it changes them, it energizes them, it darkens them, and it transforms them. And they go from using women to controlling, to dominating, to humiliating, to inflicting pain, and then generating trauma. That's what people don't understand. I didn't understand that until getting into that world. You saw the horrific stuff as far as pictures and whatnot. I had the unique opportunity of doing 11 years of research, what amounts to research, behind bars, and to see then what these guys talk about as they're incarcerated, how their minds work during sex offender treatment. And they don't want people to know, and it took me years to finally catch on. And so once I went after this issue, that 100% of every sex offender, without exception, is deeply steeped in massive amounts of porn. Not just because they're addicted, but then they get addicted to the darkness. And that's what leads them down. And therefore, now they derive excitement and they are energized by generating pain. They don't even know what a normal relationship is any longer, and they don't care, and they're not interested. And that's that darkness. From a Christian perspective, we call that becoming reprobate. Pat, speak to, in closing, parents are going to send their kids off to college. The kids are deciding upon what school, and certain schools out there now, an ever-increasing amount of schools, a number of schools, are having these sex weeks. And so let's say, we have one school that doesn't have it, another school that does have it. Knowing what you know and all those years that you have been fighting this stuff, help a parent, help a young person understand that there's a certain element behind all of this sex week activity that has designs on them.
Well, that's certainly true. And what people need to understand is that, when kids go to college, they don't need more pornography sanctioned by the university. They get it anyway. It's all over the dorm. It's what people are talking about. But what they need to understand about pornography is that it's different than reading the classics. There is a debate about whether there is such a thing as addiction to pornography or addiction to sex. There are 39 studies over the last few years that demonstrate that pornography is addictive. And there's a study out just a few years ago about the nature of pornography in America. 4 researchers studied the top 50 porn films that were popular about 4 years ago. And of those top 50 porn films, 88% of the scenes, 88% depicted sexual violence against women. And that created kind of a stir. Why are men interested in sexual violence against women? Well, it's the addiction. They go from looking at one kind of porn, but the brain always says, I need harder and more deviant. And they move to the next thing. And then this can all happen in a short time on the internet because it's all right there. So they move to harder and more deviant material, and that's what the brain is demanding. And of course they're interested then in sexual violence. So when you layer on top of that the university sanctioning and paying for these events, you have you develop, as you mentioned earlier, permission-giving beliefs. What I want to do as a result of seeing these films is okay. I've been given permission, not just by the films I've watched, but by the university I attend. And I can't think of any incident where there's been a positive result because of Sex Week on campus. But we know of untold numbers of events where sexual violence has occurred on college campuses because of a boy steeped in pornography. And why should the university sanction that?
That's right. And hopefully parents, in being able to have this discussion with their young people, if at the end of, let's say, a 4-year education, the kid has worked hard, the young person has worked hard, And so they graduate, and now they start to move on with their career. What the young person, I believe, needs to think seriously about, as well as the parent, is what happens if, as the young person is graduating, that they are leaving that school with two things. A character that is now less able to move in the direction of healthy wholeness, but is compromised, has now become comfortable with moral compromise, if not deviance, as well as, for a lot of the young girls, of course, now carrying scars that they didn't have, emotional scars. Now they're just starting adulthood, and they either are morally compromised or now they're emotionally damaged. And how many stories do we see in the news of professional individuals that what happened in their 20s and 30s now comes home to roost? And 4 years is a short time to reap those kind of consequences. Pat, any last words about that?
Well, that's something every parent ought to consider. Money is difficult to come by. Spend it well, but protect your children. And we do all we can to protect our children when they're in our home. We can protect them on college campuses by selecting the right campuses and speaking up when these events are going to occur. They've been shut down some places. We can make sure that kids are not indoctrinated with this kind of material at schools we're supporting.
Well, Mr. Pat Truman, it's an honor to have you on podcast. I first heard you when you were on Dr. Dobson's program, so I am just thrilled that you came on. You're doing a tremendous work. We will have a link to, and we have in the past, featured a number of the different pieces of information that have come out of the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. Folks, that is an organization that you can get behind. They really are the ones that are doing just the best work that really can make a difference in terms of public policy and influencing corporate decisions. So I have such admiration, Pat, for you and your work and your whole staff there.
Thank you, John.
And I look forward to maybe possibly future podcasts.
Let's do that.
Well, I appreciate it very much.
All right, John. God bless.
You've been listening to Predator Watch, dedicated to shining the light of truth about the nature of the most sophisticated of sexual predators most likely to target places where victims are most easily accessed. For Jon Uhler and the entire team, thanks for listening.
Predator Watch has been sponsored by SurvivorSupport.net. As a nonprofit organization, Survivor Support is dependent upon the generosity of people who believe in its mission of supporting survivors. Please consider becoming a monthly supporter of this important work.